Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Audit, Risk and Governance Committee meeting held at the Council Chamber on Monday, the 27th of May, 2024. I'd like to call the meeting open at 5:30 p.m. I'd like to acknowledge the Noongar people of the Budja, the land that we gather on today. For thousands of years, their connection to country has provided knowledge, guidance, and spirituality and life. We pay our respects to this ongoing connection, as well as to their elders past, present, and emerging. I'd like to advise that the meeting is being audio recorded in accordance with council policy. No other visual or audio recordings of this meeting by any other means is allowed. Agenda item 1 tonight is attendances and apologies, which we have received an apology from Councillor Morgan Bias. Mr. CEO.
Mr. President, I remember I haven't received any other apologies at this point in time.
Thank you. Which brings us to agenda item number 2, which is public questions, which I have received now.
There's none been received prior to the meeting, Mr. President.
And agenda item 3 is deputations, of which I have received now.
None received, Mr. President.
Thank you. Yeah, we can move on to agenda item number 4, which is declaration of committee members and officers' interests, which I have received nil. Then we'll move on to agenda item number 5, receipt of minutes or reports and consideration of adoption of recommendations from committee meetings held since the previous council meeting. Agenda item 5.1.1, Audit, Risk and Governance Committee meeting held on the 26th of February 2024. Do I have a mover for these minutes? Mrs. Nearby. And a seconder, Mr. Corelli. Thank you very much. Is anybody opposed to this motion? No, that is carried unanimously. Move on to agenda item number 6, 6.1, Strategic Risk Registry Quarterly Review Report. Does anybody have any questions pertaining to the report? Mrs. Nearby.
I didn't want to disappoint you, did I? Now, I might jump a little bit around with some of these, but if I start with risk number 8, we've taken off action 4 and we're beginning to implement this condition survey program for each asset class. And I presume it's just been rolled into control number 9, which we haven't changed. It's on the new control. So I'm just wondering, have we changed the responsibility to incorporate this into that control? Because it's said exactly the same. Normally when we have an action and we put it moves into a control when we've completed it, but this one's just been rolled into control number 9. I have to look at it on my big screen. It's a bit hard to read on here without a magnifying glass.
Through the chair, the assumption by Mrs. Newby is correct.
I do have a further one on that. The controls number 15 and perhaps 13. I'm just wondering about how effective the implementation of that control, and I'm wondering if it should include roads, drainage assets, etc. Now, my reason for bringing this particular one up is when we have take over an asset from a developer, I don't know what quality controls are about acceptance of it. I can give it as an example. When I was out running yesterday down Harness Way, which I haven't run down for a while, it's a fairly brand new road. It's a new subdivision. I declare it's right next door to our property. There are significant holes in the road, and I'm talking about significant in a number of places, and some of them even have water in them. Now, that's a road breaking up. I don't know how old it is. 2 or 3 years would be absolute most. Time goes by, I forget when these things happen, but I think it's that sort of time frame. And so that's what I'm wondering is about how effective our control is over picking up the asset management of those roads, because that would extend also, I presume, to their drainage assets, etc., which the council becomes responsible for. And in a time where we already know with the audit report that we are under our replacement rate, if you like, for assets, if we can't replace them, we need to at least be maintaining them at a certain area. But that road needs significant work done on it if it's not going to deteriorate further.
Mr. The Director of Infrastructure, I'm sure, can give an update to the committee on the improvements that have been made to how we take over assets now, particularly road assets in the subdivision process.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. CEO. Through the chair, we have put in new processes for inspections and taking over assets from developers, including drainage and roads, where we have put in hold points before the developer proceeds from stage to stage of the construction. So we have better control measures in place now. In terms of the road conditions, the current practice is that every 5 years we do a road condition survey of all the Shire roads, which then tells us in what condition the roads are. We have the data from the last survey was done in 2022. So now the next survey would be in 2027. So we've have that data now. We have asked for funding in next year's budget to develop pavement rehabilitation forward works plan, which will use the asset data, road condition data, to develop a forward works plan in the order of priority, how those pavements, whether it's resurfacing or pavement rehabilitation, can be done, which will also have costings. We're planning to have that work completed before the end of 2024 to inform the 2025-2026 budget.
But just a follow-up question, if I may, Chair, is that are we covered if we've got a warranty period when we take assets over from developers? Are we ensuring before the expiry of that warranty period that that roads or culverts or anything else we've taken over from them, parts, could be anything, are up to spec and that we accept them? Because if we're not, then I think this is a major loophole that we have in our maintenance program.
Thank you, Ms. Newby, Director.
Thanks for your question. With developers, we have 12 months defects liability period that the developers are liable for the quality of work. That's 12 months from the practical completion date, at which time we inspect the roads with the developer. We come up with a list of defects if there are defects, and we give the contractor time or the developer time to rectify within 1 to 3 months usually. And then 12 months from the practical completion date, we do another inspection for the final handover. And if we find further defects in the road, which may have come about during that 12 months, then we issue a notice to the developer to rectify those. If there's no defects at that time, then the asset is actually for the Shire to maintain. The Shire will take the responsibility for it.
I'll just suggest as a question, maybe we need to review a 12-month defect period. I mean, it would seem to me that that wouldn't be sufficient, or we haven't properly checked that road, because a road that's fairly new shouldn't be in the condition that it's in.
So that's the accepted standard by IPWEA, Institute of Public Works Engineers, and also by the Act, I think. So subdivision guidelines, it's 12 months defects liability, which is actually the same period of defects liability in our contracts for our own projects, where we put in our contracts. That's a standard practice, 12 months.
Thank you, Director. Any further questions? I will just, before you do, Ms. Newby, I will ask one question, Director, just in regards to that same line. Do we, through our current resourcing levels, actually have the resourcing to get all the adequate inspections done in that 12-month period?
Thank you for the question. Yes, we do. So the infrastructure directorate was restructured in 2021. And one section of the infrastructure directorate that manages subdivisions was completely overhauled and restructured to make sure we have enough resources to manage the developments that were coming. So we are well resourced in that area.
Thank,
Can I add, Mr. Presiding Member, that if the subdivision Ms. Neely is talking about was before that, then that might be the issue that we've encountered there.
thank you, Director and CEO. Any further questions, Ms. Newby?
Right, with risk number 11, which is the community engagement one, I'm just wondering if we should be adding to that, to look at that, about how we handle community complaints. And so do we coordinate them centrally to ascertain trends or anything else? And it was I just thought it was something with community engagement that we just don't seem to have feedback on, because one of the best feedbacks with community engagement is complaints. Now, I know some of them might seem a little minor, but if there's a trend with complaints, it often gives a trend. In business, complaints are usually our best indication. At least they're, wanting to tell us that we could improve, and it's a good way of giving feedback through community engagement. So I just wondered if that had been considered.
Director of Community Engagement.
Thank you for the question, and through the presiding member. Around 4 years ago, an action from an internal audit that was done was a recommendation to review our complaints handling process, and that occurred, and the review of the policy was endorsed by council, and we do now have a centralised process for complaints handling. That is coordinated by our coordinator of customer service, and a report is, as part of the policy, it states that a report is presented to the executive management team quarterly, and that does occur. And to the point that you have raised, it does identify trends and issues, and so that is highlighted to the executive management team. It also, the report provides what process improvements plans have been identified within that reporting period. And at an operational level, managers and directors are engaged regarding recommendations from the coordinator of customer service to identify whether it's a process improvement, maybe a change to service delivery. And again, those process improvements are reported through to EMG. And just lastly, we have implemented a new customer contact centre in the last 3 months. And within that customer contact centre, there is the option for residents to provide feedback either verbally or through, a touchscreen functionality. And we're now providing reporting to EMG on those stats. And any resident that presses 1 or 2, which indicates our service delivery hasn't met the customer's expectations, at a minimum, they get a follow-up phone call from our customer service team to understand why they selected the 1 or the 2.
No, I think that's good. I think, though, that we should add it as one of our controls, because there's obviously an important control that we have with community. I didn't see it there. As it's not listed, I don't think. As I said, it's been it's me. I don't think there's a that's on that list.
Yes, and wouldn't have any opposition to that being included as a control for community engagement.
Oh, I think it's an important control that you've got there.
The director might be able to help out with some wording when we get to the motion, if someone's happy to move that, Mr. Presiding Member, to assist the members with a motion.
Thank you, Director. Any further questions, Ms. Newby?
Yes, risk number 16, which is a high risk one. I'm just wondering if we're on track to achieve those June 24 dates. This is the one about capital projects. So my question is, are we on track for those?
Director of Corporate Services.
While the director reviews that, I can answer the first action about partnering with other local governments. We have looked at that, and it's a bit challenging to do, really, I have to say. So we're probably not going to recommend that much happen in that space unless we identify a joint project together rather than taking works together. Would be the answer to that question, but we'll do some reporting back at that at the next meeting.
Okay, thank you, Mr. CEO, for that small time brief, because I've got myself in order for the next. And I might alert the Director of Infrastructure. I'll probably hand over when we get to 5 to him. But in the case of 3 and 4, so 3 is yes. The small caveat on that is I don't ever see that process ending, but certainly over the last 12 months, the enhancement of the framework has been enormous. What would be how I would say that? So in what was in mind when that action was put in there, yes, I think we are on track for that. And in case of point 4, the implementation of the investment and prioritise optimisation, there's a council report coming to June to discuss that particular item. In fact, I think we will probably, and that report, I'll just preempt that it will say significant deferral of that particular item. And number 5, I'll leave for the Director of Infrastructure.
I'll respond to point 5. Just a bit of background. In this year's budget, we have 7 projects that need clear permits, and we anticipate same trend continues for future capital projects where projects will need clear permits. So as we have applied for clear permits for current projects, we've discovering how complex the process is and how lengthy and costly it is. So we submitted the business case for an FTE in next year's budget to resource internally management of clear permit applications. Also, what we found is most clear permits also need offsets, which is another component of the whole process. So the new position will help with applications for clear permits and also developing a strategy for land that Shire has that can be used for offsets. So we're finding most, especially road projects and community building projects, need significant offsets as part of clear permits. So the business case is being considered as part of the 24-25 budget for a full-time FTE position.
Just to add to that, Mr. Presiding Member, 2 points I'd make about the delivery of capital projects. One is that the council's agreed to a minor restructure, which essentially splits the infrastructure directorate into 2. And we've created an executive manager of operations to focus on operations, parks and gardens, and waste and fleet, to leave the infrastructure directorate solely focused on capital projects for the next 2 years, particularly while we go through a major construction phase. And there's a lot of work to do in the other areas as well with maintenance schedules and things. And the second thing that I guess, although it's a bit of pain, but is a bit of a relief, is that recently the project management framework caught the Oakford Fire Station project before we awarded the tender, and I liaised with councillors and then declined to accept any tender because there was a difference between what the development application approved concept was and what the tender concept was. And if we had awarded the tender, we would actually been in all sorts of trouble trying to wind back work, and it would have been very messy. So the project management framework and the controls in place caught that, albeit late in the process. Would have ideally happened earlier, but nonetheless it caught it at the end before we came to council to recommend awarding of the tender for that project. So I think we're getting better at that. There's still some, as the Director of Corporate Services says, still some work to do, but yes.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. Any further questions, Ms. Neeby?
Oh, look, this is just a minor one. It's about in the agenda report, which I think it's on page, where is it? Sorry, on page 8, and it's just under risk 8. I'm just wondering, we're going to develop a bridge asset management plan. I wondered if we should add the culverts to that as well, or you want to do whether it was best to keep them separate.
I would prefer to keep them separate. It's entirely different scope of work. Just the work. So bridge asset management plan will be relatively straightforward. If we introduce all of the culverts into there, it becomes a very big job. And I'm not even sure our data is as good as it needs to be for that plan.
Thank you, Ms. Newby. Thank you, directors. Any further questions?
Yes, please. I do have a question about risk 17, which is the surprise, surprise ICT internal control. Action 2, I see the date has slipped, and that's the reviewing of the ICT department resources. That's a precursor to action 1 being deployed successfully, and that's actually putting those controls in place that came from the audit report. If that date slipped, will that have a flow-on effect to action 1? Because some of the items in there were quite important to be addressed quickly regarding cybersecurity. So is this the best course of action still, or should we be looking at going to some contractors or external support?
Thank you very much for the question. So there will be a report coming to the June meeting. I've literally got it here on my desk for review. The findings from there are exceedingly expensive. And so I guess concurrently with that, we're kind of working on how will we implement the recommendations from those controls. So yes, the first piece about resourcing the department appropriately is to be reported to council at the next OCM. Hopefully the budget, being that time date, will pick up the findings of that report or the recommendations from that report. The actual implementation of the general controls audit will be a multi-year. Well, at this stage, officers will propose a multi-year approach just because some of them are just so expensive.
And will that come back to the Audit Risk and Governance Committee to review as well?
Certainly the work on in the general controls piece will, yes.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Corelli and Director. Any further questions? President Coles.
Thank you. The first question I have is in relation to number 6, and I don't know if it's my naivety, but when we talk about the brigades, do we need to also mention, so this is in the column under controls, do we need to mention the support brigade as well? So we've got Jarrahdale, Oakford, Byford, Bunajong, Serpentine, Keysbrook. Do we need to put the support brigade in there as well? I don't know what the answer is to that.
Director of Community Engagement.
Yes, that's a good pickup, and would agree with that reflection.
Thank you, Director. And if I can, presiding member, just in relation to that, I'm trying to think of the right terms, but I guess when we look at bushfire management, I would imagine the volunteers and the members of the bushfire brigades would be probably a critical asset in relation to that. Whilst I haven't had an in-depth look at that risk, do we need to put something in there about, I'm trying to think of the right term, but relationships or not personalities, that wouldn't be right, but relationships and valuing our volunteers as a control measure. I'll be interested in your feedback on that.
Director.
Thank you through the presiding member. The report that went up to the May council meeting contained recommendations from the Bushfire Advisory Committee, specifically the discussion paper with the new Cardup Career Fire Station coming online, and the discussion paper identified a number of recommendations which picks up on what the Shire President has alluded to regarding our engagement with brigades, and we are proposing to carry out a volunteer survey with our volunteer bushfire brigade members in the 24-25 financial year, as well as doing a governance review of the emergency services team to ensure that we have the right structure and personnel within that team to support our volunteer bushfire brigade. So given that there was just the council resolution this month, while it's not obviously reflected in the strategic risk register, it is a resolution of council for the organisation to undertake that work.
Thank you, Director, and thank you, presiding member. One last question, if I may, just in relation to number 13. Monday night's ringing true in my ears about Kiernan Park. Is the CEO, I guess, as the CEO, comfortable with leaving Kiernan Park as it is in progress? And then I guess my question also is in relation to the Byford Skate Park with the clearing permits. Are you happy with as they are with in progress and not a more significant risk? Thank you.
Mr. CEO.
I'm happy to answer that, Mr. Presiding Member. I might ask the Director of Community Engagement as well to add some at the end. We're comfortable with that. The time frame is December 31, 2025. As we've pointed out in the report to Council this month, the risks are not insurmountable and we're progressing through those. It'll be up to Council now what Council wants to do. And similarly, once the Byford Skate Park Stage 2 happens, once the clearing permit's obtained, and we're almost through that process now, I understand. So they are in progress, and they're not fatal flaws yet. So if that changes, we would change it then.
No, I'm happy with that. Thank you.
Anything else you want to add, Director?
Just add that through our corporate business plan reporting, the Byford Skate Park project has been identified as on hold. So it picks up with what the CEO said. Once we know what the pathway forward is for that project, that we would then be recommending revised or realistic timelines for that project. And similarly with Kiernan Park project, once that has been presented to Council to consider the options going forward for that project, in line with our project management framework, would be updating the project plan for that project, again, to reflect realistic timelines and delivery dates for that project.
Thanks, Director. Thank you, presiding member.
Thank you, Mr. CEO and Director of Community Services. Any further questions from the floor? With that, would any councillors like to move a motion or committee members? Sorry.
If someone wanted some wording, I'm sure we could help out with some wording to add that control raised before.
Basically, I guess you call it the complaints management policy that you have that you've got in there as a control. That's all we need to add. It's just that is picked up and covered. This is under risk 11.
Yeah, I have provided some wording to our minute secretary proposing an amendment being to include Council Policy 5.3.5 complaints resolution as a control under strategic risk 11 community engagement.
It's fine. It's good. Thank you.
Ms. Nibby, are you happy to forward the motion as it reads on the screen? Thanking you.
Sorry, can I ask a question, please, presiding member? Just the addition of the support brigade, do we need to put that as a motion, or that can just be?
Feedback to the presiding members a minute ago was that we'll pick it up next time as we implement the recommendations from the last one, if the committee's happy with that.
Thank you. I'm happy to second it if Ms Newby's happy to. Thank you.
Thank you, President Coles. Is anybody opposed to the motion? If no one is opposed, that is passed unanimously.
Mr. Presiding member, we just need a reason for the difference. Would that be just to capture the customer complaints as a control?
Thank you for that, Ms Newby. That move on to agenda item 7, which is motion which notice has been given, which there was nil. Agenda item 8 was urgent business, of which there is nil. Brings us to agenda item 9, which is the closure of the meeting at 6:01 p.m. Thank you all for your attendance tonight.